15 years, and not one of you will say a single word. Ada stood alone in the stone courtyard of Hartwell Manor. The first light of dawn was a pale, unforgiving gray. Frost clung to the cobblestones beneath her thin boots. Her single bundle of belongings lay at her feet, a pitiful testament to a lifetime of service. From the upper windows, the household staff watched in a silence more crushing than any accusation. Their faces were blurred shadows behind the glass. Lord Hartwell's voice cut through the cold morning air, final and sharp as a blade. "The silver is gone. You were the last in the room. There is nothing more to discuss." The words were not just an accusation. They were an erasure. 15 years of mending their linens, of quiet nights by the fire stitching intricate patterns into gowns she would never wear, of remembering every birthday and preference without ever being thanked. It all meant nothing. The unbearable pain was not in the theft she did not commit. It was in realizing her loyalty had been invisible. Her devotion had been a convenience they enjoyed, and now discarded without a second thought. Not one voice rose from those windows. Not one step was taken on the stairs to speak for her. The great oak door of the manor closed with a solid, echoing thud. The sound sealed her fate. Ada looked from the closed door to the watching windows, then finally to the empty sky. She did not beg. She did not weep. Instead, her fingers found the worn silver thimble in her pocket, her only possession from a past she could not remember. She closed her hand around it. Her lips did not move, but in her heart, a single, silent sentence formed. "Or you see me. I have no one else, but you see me." It was not a plea. It was the last, fragile thread of a faith she would not let go. For 15 years, Ada's world had been the sunlit sewing room at the top of the house. It was a small space, but it was filled with the scent of lavender from the linens and the soft whisper of silk sliding through her fingers. Her life was measured in stitches, in the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly mended tier or a beautifully embroidered hem. She knew the feel of every fabric in the house, from the rough wool of the footmen's coats to the delicate French lace reserved for Lady Hartwell's evening gowns. Her kindness was as consistent as her work. She would leave a tiny, embroidered sprig of thyme on the pillow of a housemaid who was feeling poorly. She would use her own thread to reinforce the fraying cuffs of the head gardener's jacket, never asking for credit or payment. When the young scullery maid, Bess, was trembling with nerves before serving at her first grand dinner, it was Ada who calmed her. "Just look at the pattern on the rim of the soup tureen, my dear," she had whispered, her voice a gentle anchor. "Count the flowers. It will steady your hands." Her faith was woven into the very fabric of her days. Each morning, before she threaded her first needle, she would look out the high window. She would watch the light spread over the estate's rolling hills, and she would offer a simple, silent thought. "Thank you for this work. Thank you for these hands." She believed her service was a form of prayer. She believed that to do a small thing with great love was a sacred offering. She asked for no recognition, for she truly believed it was all recorded in a ledger far more permanent than the household accounts. Her heart was a place of quiet contentment, anchored in the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. She belonged to Hartwell Hall, and in her soul, she believed Hartwell Hall, in its own way, belonged to her. The injustice did not arrive with shouting. It arrived with a cold, formal summons. Ada was called to Lord Hartwell's study, a room she had only ever entered to deliver a finished garment. The air smelled of leather and old money. Lord Hartwell did not look at her. He stared at his desk, where a velvet pouch lay empty. "The Spanish silver coins," he stated. "A family heirloom. They were here yesterday. You were seen leaving this room after arranging the new draperies." Ada's world tilted. "My lord, I only touched the curtains. I never saw any pouch." Steward Grange, a man with eyes like flint, stepped forward. His voice was a low threat. "We have searched the servants' quarters, every trunk, every pallet, save for yours. Will you open your chest willingly, or shall we open it for you?" Her small wooden chest, at the foot of her narrow bed, contained her life. 2 spare dresses, a hairbrush, a small Bible, and a bundle of letters from a friend long gone. She stood by, her heart a drum against her ribs, as Grange rifled through her humble possessions. He tossed the dresses aside. He unfolded the letters. Then his fingers dove into the very bottom, into a corner she herself had not touched in years. He pulled out a small, folded square of faded crimson silk. "And what is this?" he demanded, shaking it open. It was a christening gown, exquisitely embroidered with a crest of intertwined lilies and stars. Ada had never seen it before in her life. "That is not mine," she breathed, the words barely audible. "It was hidden among your things," Grange said, his triumph sour in the air. "Embroidered with a noble crest. Stolen, no doubt, like the silver." Lord Hartwell finally looked at her, his gaze one of profound disappointment. "You will leave at first light. Take nothing that is not yours." She was escorted to a cold attic room for her final night. She believed her story was over. She could not know that the forgotten christening gown, hidden in her chest for 17 years, was about to change everything. The attic room was a tomb of shadows and dust. It held the ghostly shapes of broken furniture and discarded portraits draped in sheets. A single, narrow cot had been pushed against the wall. There was no candle. The only light came from a small, grimy window showing the first evening stars. Ada sat on the edge of the cot, the cold seeping through her skirts. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a life undone, of a name erased. She felt the weight of it all pressing down. The betrayal in Lord Hartwell's eyes, the smug certainty of Steward Grange, the averted gazes of the other servants as she was led away. For a long moment, she simply sat in the dark, letting the despair wash over her. Then, her fingers found the familiar, worn groove of her thimble in her pocket. She held it tight, the cool metal a tiny anchor in the vast ocean of her loneliness. She closed her eyes. Her voice, when it came, was a raw whisper in the empty room. "Father, I am so alone." She took a shuddering breath. "I have nothing to offer you but this confusion." A floorboard creaked somewhere in the dark attic. "I do not understand why this is happening." She pressed the thimble to her heart. "But I believe you are still here." The words hung in the cold air. They felt fragile, like the first thread on a bare loom. Yet, as she spoke them, a strange warmth began to spread through her chest. It was not the warmth of a fire, but of a stubborn, quiet ember that refused to be extinguished. She thought of the christening gown. A mystery, yes, a condemnation in the eyes of men. But what if it was something else? What if it was a signpost in the dark, placed there by a hand she could not see? She lay down on the cot, staring at the slice of starry sky. For the first time since the accusation, a sliver of peace cut through the fear. She did not have answers, but she had a thread of hope, and for tonight, that was enough. Dawn arrived, cold and merciless. Ada was brought down to the main courtyard, the same stones now slick with a thin layer of morning frost. Her bundle was thrust into her arms. Now, the entire household had been assembled by Steward Grange's order: footmen, maids, cooks, stable hands. They formed a silent, shamefaced semicircle. This was to be her final humiliation, a lesson to them all about the price of dishonesty. Lord and Lady Hartwell watched from the stone steps, their expressions unreadable. Steward Grange stepped forward, his voice carrying across the hushed yard. Let it be known that Ada Miller, seamstress, has been found guilty of theft against the House of Hartwell. She leaves this place with nothing, for that is what she brought. Let her fate remind you all that loyalty is earned, and trust, once broken, is gone forever. He then walked up to Ada, stopping so close she could smell the pomade on his hair. In a voice meant only for her, yet loud enough for the first row to hear, he hissed, "You are nothing. You were always nothing. A nameless orphan we sheltered out of charity. Remember that as you beg on the roads." He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, eyes dropping to the ground. Ada stood straight, her cheeks burning, but she held her head high. She would not give him the satisfaction of her tears. But one person in that crowd had gone completely still. An elderly woman, a visiting dowager of high station who had arrived the previous evening, stood near the manor doors. Her sharp, intelligent eyes were fixed not on Grange, but on Ada's face. And what she saw in the set of the girl's jaw, in the quiet dignity that refused to crumble, had just shattered a memory 17 years old. Ada walked until the high gates of Hartwell were lost behind a bend in the road. She walked until her legs trembled and the cold bit through her shawl. She found herself at a crossroads, marked by a single ancient oak tree. Its bare branches clawed at the gray sky. This was the edge of the world, she knew. Beyond lay unknown villages, strange faces, and a vast, terrifying emptiness. She sank onto a large root at the base of the tree, her bundle falling to the frozen earth. The full force of her desolation crashed over her then. She had no family, no references, no name that meant anything. She was branded a thief. The sobs came, great heaving waves that shook her entire frame. She cried for the home she lost, for the years given, for the cruel lie that now defined her. When the tears were spent, leaving her hollow and raw, as she looked up at the indifferent sky, and she began to pray, her voice broken and fierce. God of the forgotten, hear me. She clutched the roots beneath her. I am cast out. I am alone. A lone crow called in the distance. They have taken my name and called me thief. She pressed her forehead against the rough bark. I have nothing left to give but this pain. The wind sighed through the branches above. If you are there, if you see me, show me. She opened her empty hands, palms upward. I cannot walk this road alone. A single, withered leaf drifted down and landed in her palm. I surrender it all to you, every last shred. She closed her fingers around the leaf, a final act of faith. In that moment of total surrender, a profound quiet settled in her spirit. The fear did not vanish, but it lost its sharp edge. She was still at a crossroads. She still had nowhere to go, but she was no longer alone in the emptiness. A presence, vast and gentle, had filled the space around her. She did not hear a voice. She felt a certainty. The prayer had been heard. The story was not over. Ada had only taken a few steps down the left fork of the road when the sound of hooves made her turn. A modest carriage, dusty from travel, was approaching from the direction of Hartwell. It slowed as it reached the crossroads, and the driver called the horses to a halt. The door opened, and a man in a dark, formal coat stepped down. He carried a leather satchel worn smooth with age. His eyes were kind, his bearing one of quiet authority. "Forgive me," he said, his voice calm. "I am seeking Hartwell Manor. Am I on the correct path?" Ada nodded, wrapping her shawl tighter. "Just beyond the bend, sir." The man studied her face, then her humble bundle. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps divine prompting, passed over his features. "You have come from there?" he asked gently. "I have," Ada whispered, looking at the ground. The man did not move to re-enter his carriage. Instead, he opened his satchel. "I am a notary public. I carry documents of inheritance and last testaments. I have traveled 3 days on a singular errand." He pulled out a folded parchment, sealed with crimson wax. Then, he drew out a small, flat object wrapped in linen. He unfolded the cloth carefully. Ada's breath caught. There, gleaming in the weak sunlight, was a perfect, miniature silver replica of a christening gown. It was a delicate pendant, and embroidered upon its tiny silken front was a crest, intertwined lilies and stars. It was an exact match in every minute detail to the embroidery on the gown found in her chest. "This pendant," the notary said, his voice filled with awe, "was given to me by a dying woman 17 years ago. She entrusted me with a mission to find the child who wore the gown that matched this crest. I have searched every county." He looked from the pendant to Ada's face, his eyes widening. But the gown itself was only half the proof. "What I now draw from my coat pocket would change not only her life, but the fate of every person in that house." The notary did not take Ada to an inn. He turned his carriage around and directed it back toward Hartwell Manor. This time, Ada sat inside, the sealed parchment and the silver pendant resting in her lap like sleeping doves. When they arrived, the courtyard was still abuzz with the morning's drama. The notary asked for the entire household, and Lord Hartwell himself to assemble once more. Confused and irritated, they gathered. Steward Grange stood with a smug impatience. The notary stood on the very steps where Ada had been cast out. He broke the wax seal with a crack that echoed in the silence. "By the authority vested in me," he proclaimed, his voice ringing clear, "I read the last will and testament of Lady Eleanor St. Clair of Blackwood Hall." He read the legal phrases, but all ears waited for the heart of it. "And to my only daughter, Adelaide, stolen from me in infancy, I leave my entire estate, lands, and title. She is identified by the matching crest upon her christening gown, a copy of which I entrust to my notary. Find my child. Restore her name." He held up the silver pendant. Then he turned to Ada. "The gown in your possession is the proof. You are not Ada Miller, orphan. You are Lady Adelaide St. Clair, sole heir to Blackwood." The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Hartwell went pale. Lady Hartwell's hand flew to her mouth. Steward Grange's face collapsed into stunned disbelief. The servants stared, their eyes wide with awe and dawning shame. The visiting dowager stepped forward, her eyes bright with tears. "I knew it," she said, her voice trembling. "I saw her mother in her bearing the moment she was scorned." In that courtyard, before every soul who had witnessed her humiliation, Ada's true worth was declared by the most unassailable authority. the law of man affirming the providence of God. The orphan was a lady. The thief was an heiress. The one they cast out with nothing now possessed more than they could imagine. Her 15 years of silent service had not been erased. They had been the faithful stewardship of a heart being prepared for its true destiny. God had recorded every stitch, every kindness, every silent prayer. He had allowed the crushing not to destroy her, but to bring her forth like gold, in the full view of those who had deemed her worthless. The verse that filled her heart was from the Psalms. You have turned for me my mourning into dancing. You have loosed my sackcloth and clothed me with gladness. She was clothed now, not in servant's wool, but in the gladness of a divine restoration. Did you ever give your silent, faithful best to a place or a person, only to be discarded as if those years meant nothing? Have you ever stood at a crossroads of despair, wondering if God saw your invisible service? He does. He is the notary of heaven, sealing your inheritance with a love that cannot be broken. Your worth is not defined by the house that casts you out, but by the Father who calls you home. If this story of divine justice and restored worth resonated with your spirit, would you consider subscribing and turning on notifications for more stories like this? Your support helps us bring these messages of hope to others who need to remember their true, God-given value. Thank you for listening.